1931 and the world is in turmoil. In October 1929, the American stock market had suffered its worst crash in history, and by the end of 1930, its effects were being felt around the world in what became known as the Great Depression. Europe, its recovery from the devastation of the First World War still shaky, was racked by strikes, protests and riots, as both far-right and far-left ideologies rose in popularity. Fascist Italy and the Soviet Union, both established in 1922, now seemed to be the models for the future, as many felt liberal democracy had failed, and Germany in particular saw running street battles between the militias of the Communist and National Socialist parties, as well as attempts by both to undermine the liberal Weimar Republic. Elsewhere, calls for Indian independence became louder as Mohandas K. Gandhi was released from prison following the salt marches, but the British government is distracted at home by increasing social unrest as unemployment climbed higher and higher, and Labour Party member Sir Oswald Mosley left to form his own party, the New Party, with their own street-fighting militia in imitation of the German National Socialists. And late in 1930, the members of the Association Internationale des Automobiles Clubs Reconnus, AIACR, the governing body of world motorsport, got together to suggest having another go at organising some kind of championship of motor racing, after the World Manufacturers' Championship launched in 1925 had ended up being a bit of a damp squib and ushered in a few years of technical stagnation. As well as the usual plethora of Grand Prix in all manner of venues, they decided that the automobile clubs of Belgium, France, Italy and Spain would all hold a 10-hour endurance race and contribute 150,000 French francs to the prize fund, with the winner decided on the basis of who had covered more distance on aggregate across the four races. After further consideration, that was rejected as a bad idea, and instead the four races would be individual events with points awarded. But Spain ended up withdrawing from the whole idea early on, due to their own ongoing political instability. The point system was, by the standards we're used to today, rather bizarre. The winner was awarded 1 point, second place 2 points, and third place 3. Anyone else who completed more than 75% race distance got 4 points, 5 for between 50 and 75%, 6 for between 25 and 50%, 7 for less than 25%, and 8 for a disqualification or not starting. The champion, as you've probably guessed, would be the one with the fewest points after the 3 races, with ties broken by the distance covered. As it was usual in longer races like that for cars to be shared between 2 drivers, to be eligible for the championship, a combination of drivers would have to be registered at the start of the year and drive together for all 3 races in the nominated car, which of course guaranteed that there would be a points tie. In many races in the season, the field would be divided between Formula Libre cars of engine capacity over 1.5 litres and voiturettes with 1.5 litre and smaller motors, and most of the main competitors would naturally be found in the bigger cars. There were few rules for the Formula Libre cars, as the name suggests, only that the cars must be 2-seaters with a minimum width of 100 centimetres, but that only the driver would be permitted to drive the car, no ride-along mechanics, and at pit stops only 2 mechanics in addition to the driver or drivers could work on the car. Pit stops were also the only time that drivers could swap. There are 3 championship races, 2 additional Grande Épreuve, and 25 other races, but to keep this video to a reasonably manageable length, I'm just going to pick the 11 major races out of the third category, which does unfortunately mean skating, over the Swedish Winter Grand Prix, a 40-minute lap through snowy forests including a 2-kilometre section on a frozen lake, won by Finnish driver and Olympic steeplechaser Kalle Ebb in an Auburn special with studded tyres, beating the big draw upcoming hill climb specialist Rudolf Caracciola in a giant 7-litre Mercedes SSK equipped with snow chains. Instead, we wind forward to late March and the third Tunisian Grand Prix, which for this year had moved from a street circuit at Le Bardo to one between Tunis and Carthage, a roughly triangular 8-mile street circuit which would be lapped 37 times. The race would take place as part of the 50th anniversary celebrations of Tunisia becoming a French protectorate, and the organisers pulled out all the stops, even arranging perfect racing weather. And with all the major competitors present, this seems as good a time as any to have a quick introduction to the runners and riders.
Just as in 1930, the competition will mostly be between the French Bugatti and the Italian Alfa Romeo marques, with fellow Italians, the Maserati brothers, also looking strong, and the big German Mercedes-Benz cars potential dark horses. Bugatti have 2 new models for their works team, the Type 51 with a supercharged 2.3-litre straight-8 engine, and the Type 54 with a 4.9-litre straight-8. Among the private entries, though, there are still several of the older Type 35 and 37s that so dominated the 1920s with a variety of power plants. The undoubted star of the Bugatti factory team is Achille Varzi, recently signed from the Alfa Romeo works to join Monegasque Louis Chiron, the French duo of Albert Divot and Guy Bouriat, and our very own William Grover Williams. Alfa Romeo also have two new types for 1931. The Tipo R, powered by twin inline six-cylinder engines, each of 1752 cc's, and the 8C 2300, named for its eight-cylinder inline engine. The Alfa Romeo driver's stable is an all-Italian affair, led by the flying Mantuan himself, Tazio Nuvolari, who will be looking forward to renewing his rivalry with former teammate Varzi. He is joined by Mr. Borzacchini, christened Bakunin after the Russian revolutionary Mikhail Bakunin, but racing under the more politically neutral name Mario Umberto at the suggestion of Signor Mussolini. The great baritone and chef Giuseppe Campari is another on the roster, along with Luigi Arcangeli, 3 times Le Mans winner Attilio Marinoni, the experienced Nando Minoia, and Count Freddy Zehnder, a former Bugatti man. As well as the works team, Alfa Romeo have last year made an agreement with Mr. Enzo Ferrari, whose Scuderia Ferrari will operate semi-independently as a kind of junior team, using older cars, mostly the 6C models, and with a wide roster of Italian drivers from which Alfa Romeo may spot talent for the future. And the boys from Bologna, Alfieri Maserati and his brothers, will continue with last year's 2.5-litre straight-8 26M model and the older, more powerful V4 with its twin straight-8 engines for a total 4-litre engine capacity. Alfieri's brother Ernesto will be on driving duties and has first dibs on the V4, with Luigi Fagioli, winner of last year's Coppaciano, Pietro Gerzi, who won last year's Spa 24 Hours along with Marinoni, and the so-called Tuscan wolf Clemente Biondetti, along with last year's Monaco winner, the French driver René Dreyfus. There is no works Mercedes-Benz team, at least on the international scene, but several private entries are said to have significant factory backing. The SSK model, a development of the S model of the late 20s that was nicknamed the White Elephant, is the biggest and most powerful car out there, with a huge supercharged 7-litre inline-6 engine, which gives the car an all-up weight of 3,750 pounds or 1,700 kilos, compared with the 2,050 pounds or 930 kilos of the Alfa Tipo A. The most prominent entrant of the Mercedes is Russian émigré Count Boris Ivanovsky, who often pairs with Frenchman Henri Stoffel for endurance races, but young German Rudolf Caracciola is beginning to make a name for himself as a hill climb expert and will hope to enter several races this year, along with stablemate Otto Mertz, who was driving behind Archduke Franz Ferdinand on that fateful day in Sarajevo and, according to some reports, carried the dying Archduke away from his car.
And at 1 p.m, away they went, with Luigi Fagioli taking an early lead in his 2-litre Maserati, leading Achille Varzi in the Solworks Bugatti and René Dreyfus in another Maserati, though Varzi got past Fagioli on the second lap to take the lead. At the end of lap 9, Dreyfus pulled in to have a broken oil pipe fixed, a job which took 3 minutes 45 seconds, and off he went again in 4th place, only to fling it off as he tried to recover, so French-Algerian Marcel Lehoux in his private Bugatti and Clemente Biondetti's works Maserati moved up the order. Fagioli pulled in to change his spark plugs on lap 12 without losing second, and then 2 laps later the leader Varzi had a puncture and had to trail in for new tyres, which allowed Fagioli to take the lead, which he lost when he had to change his spark plugs again and restarted third as Marcel Lehoux went through in the Bugatti. The Maseratis were having all the bad luck, with Biondetti now also having a puncture and being passed by Heinrich Joachim von Morgan of the German Bugatti team and Bugatti driving privateer Philippe Etancelin, though the Frenchman dropped out with gearbox trouble. Biondetti put on a charge and repassed von Morgan's car, but couldn't do anything to make up on the leaders, and the race finished after just under 3.5 hours, with Achille Varzi the winner at an average speed of 86.6 miles an hour, followed by Fagioli and Lehoux, who'd been running close together most of the race, with Biondetti 4th, von Morgan 5th, and Count Tchaikovsky 6th. Umberto Klinger was 7th in the big Maserati 26M, with Ernesto Maserati 8th and winner of the Voiturette class in the smaller version, over 10 minutes ahead of Pierre Véron in his privately entered Bugatti. In all, 16 drivers were classified from an original field of 26. And so 3 weeks later to Monaco for the third edition of its race, rapidly becoming one of the major events with 100,000 French francs prize on offer. For this race, 16 of the 23 entries were in Bugattis, including the 4 works cars of Varzi, Divo, Buria and the local star Louis Chiron. The Maserati works team of Biondetti, Dreyfus and Fagioli were there, as was Rudolf Caracciola in his privately entered 7-litre Mercedes SSKL, but the other Mercedes, driven by Ivanovski, was excluded on the grounds that the Count hadn't done any practice laps and was late to the weigh-in. The 3-car Alfa Romeo works team had entered but pulled out, as they were contracted to one brand of tyres and weren't happy with their recent performance in the Mille Miglia, and Sir Henry Birkin's Maserati blew a cylinder head joint, so he wasn't going anywhere either. As was traditional, the grid was decided by drawing lots, which put Dreyfus on pole with 2 privateers, Swiss Hans Stuber and German Bernhard Ackel alongside, with Caracciola and Divo on row 2, Lehoux and Biondetti on row 3, Varzi, Chiron and von Morgan on row 4, and Guy Bouriat all the way back on row 7. And away they went, Dreyfus leading away in the Maserati, but Williams in his private Bugatti took the lead a couple of laps in, only to have a broken valve spring which put him out a lap later. So Dreyfus in the red Maserati was back in the lead, but Achille Varzi was charging in the blue Bugatti, and on lap 7 he got past. But the real story was Chiron, who had passed Caracciola's powerful but cumbersome Mercedes for third by lap 10, and by lap 20 he had also passed Dreyfus for second and was bearing down on Varzi. Guy Bouriat had also put on a spectacular charge from the back and now made his way past Caracciola into fourth, which became third when Dreyfus came in to have a broken oil line repaired. Then on lap 27, Varzi was limping into the pits with a smashed front wheel, which put Chiron into the lead to the wild cheers of the spectators. Chiron never lost the lead, but behind him Bouriat was never seriously threatened until he had to stop to change spark plugs, which allowed a charging Fagioli through in the Maserati. Louis Chiron took an immensely popular home win after about 3 hours 40 minutes, with Fagioli and Varzi second and third, Bouriat fourth, Zehnder in the Ferrari-entered Alfa 5th, and André Boillot 6th in an elderly Peugeot. A week later it was the newly christened Gran Premio Bordino, the 8th running of the Circuito di Alessandria just across the border in Piedmont, on a circuit just short of 5 miles around the town. Pietro Bordino had been a star racer of the 1920s and won the 1922 Italian Grand Prix, as well as winning on the IndyCar circuit twice that year. He'd been killed in the 1929 Alessandria race, hitting a dog that ran into the road and ending up in the river, and so the circuit had been named after him. A big entry list of 50 participants was again very Bugatti heavy, the new car having proved its worth, though there were questions about 2 of the big-name competitors, with Achille Varzi only picking up his racing car from Molsheim the previous day and driving it down in time, while Tazio Nuvellari's Alfa Romeo was only entered at the last minute, the Italian team now happier with their tyres. Both Nuvellari and Varzi were previous winners of this race, though in opposite cars to what they were driving now, and the pair were front-runners throughout the race, Nuvellari all over the back of Varzi's Bugatti but unable to do anything before his differential went after 9 laps of the 35, leaving Varzi to cruise to an easy win, ahead of privateer Minozzi in an older Bugatti and von Morgan in one of the newer ones. The Voiturettes were back for this race, but only 3 finished in the end, with a Monsieur Camotte in a Salmson taking an easy win. Hostilities were renewed between Varzi and Nuvellari 2 weeks later at the Targa Florio, an epic 580-kilometre road race on Sicily, which was already in its 22nd year. However, Ettore Bugatti had had a road accident in the meantime, and the factory decided to withdraw the works team with nothing to prove after Monaco, leaving Varzi to paint his red and run it as a private entry, but the Italians weren't fooled and were getting behind the Alfas of Nuvellari and Luigi Arcangeli and the Maseratis of Fagioli, Biondetti and Dreyfus. As if scripted, Varzi drew the pole position, and the Italian press billed the race as Varzi versus the rest. The cars set off at 5-minute intervals, all with a mechanic on board, for the circuit of over 90 miles, except Dreyfus, whose mechanic had become seasick while on the practice run, so René balanced the car with a big oil tank on the passenger seat and hoped he wouldn't need a mechanic. Varzi took advantage of his head start, chased by Bozzacchini and Fagioli, but the latter had a hair-raising accident on a bridge over a mountain stream, hitting the parapet and bending the axle severely. He was fine if shaken, but that was one of the great Italian hopes out. By Petrolea, 38 miles from the start, Bozzacchini had almost caught Varzi on the climb to the summit, but lost him again on the descent, the Maserati much better in second and third gears. By the end of the first lap, Varzi had set a lap record and led Borzacchini by 3 minutes, with Nuvolari right on his heels, but he made an unexpected stop to change 2 tyres, unexpected by the crew, that is, who took over 2 minutes to do the job. And then it started to rain, and suddenly the Alphas had an advantage. They had front mudguards. As Varzi lost time again, Borzacchini dropped to 4th, with Nuvolari now taking up the chase, while Biondetti crashed in the same place as his teammate Fagioli had, unable to see where he was going through the muddy spray. Parts of the track in the mountains were getting very treacherous indeed, but at the end of the third lap, after another round of pit stops, Varzi still led, but the strain on drivers was obvious. As the leader came in for a spark plug change and new goggles, both car and driver were so caked in mud that the red of the car and the blue overalls were now just yellow mud, while Luigi Arcangeli had been hit in the eye by a flying stone and added blood to his mask of mud. He was in no state to continue, and Count Zehnder took over the car for the final lap. By this time there were only 6 cars still running, the 5 Alphas of Nuvolari, Borzacchini, D'Ippolito, Campari and Zehnder, and Varzi's Bugatti still hanging onto the lead. But on that lap the conditions told, and Varzi just couldn't keep the others behind him. Nuvolari and Borzacchini both overtook him somewhere up in the mountains to come home the leaders, Nuvolari winning the race in 9 hours and 27 seconds. Remaining in Italy, it was now time for the 9th Italian Grand Prix, also designated the 7th European Grand Prix, which would take place on the 10km 6.2-mile Monza A circuit, which included the high-speed oval. There were 25 planned entries, but in the end only 14 cars made the grid. Sadly, Luigi Arcangeli was killed in a practice accident at the Curva di Lesmo, skidding off and hitting a tree at the same point where Ugo Sivocci and Count Louis Borowski had lost their lives in 1923 and 24 respectively. The Alfa Romeo team were all ready to pull out until a telegram arrived from Mussolini. "I pay my most sincere respects to the champion Arcangeli, who has died a glorious death. I also think of duty, and my orders are, start and win. Mussolini." So they rearranged their driver lineup, with Attilio Marinoni taking over Arcangeli's place, partnering Campari, and reserve driver Nando Minoia coming in to partner Zehnder, with the lead pairing of Nuvolari and Borzacchini unchanged. The 3 Maserati cars, slated to be driven by Fagioli and Maserati, Dreyfus and Gerzi, and Biondetti and Parenti, had all been withdrawn, as 2 of them were in pieces after the Targa Florio, leaving the marque represented only by a single privateer shared by Umberto Klinger and Pietro Gerzi. With a 7 a.m. start for the 10-hour race, there was still a surprisingly big crowd, and Marcel Lehoux in his private Bugatti took an early lead before Varzi in the works car took over at the end of the first lap, followed by Campari in the Alfa. Over the opening hours, Varzi continued extending his lead while Lehoux dropped further back as Nuvolari climbed the order in the new twin-6 Alfa Tipo A before he pulled in to retire it, and the team reorganised things again, with Nuvolari now taking over from Campari at the wheel of car 1, with Borzacchini bumping Zehnder out of car 3. At about a quarter distance, most of the cars came in for fuel and a change of drivers, and Varzi handed over to Louis Chiron, but the Monegasque was soon seen slowing down and had to retire with a broken rear axle, which rather took some of the spice out of the race, especially when Lehoux also dropped out with a broken valve. So, by about halfway, Campari and Nuvolari were in the lead, followed by Minoia and Borzacchini, then Divot and Buria in the works Bugatti, then Klinger and Gerzi in the private Maserati, with Ivanovski and Stoffel 5th in the sole Mercedes. The German car lost 5th to another private Bugatti driven by Jean-Pierre Wimy and Jean Gopia, who moved up another place when the Maserati pulled in for what turned out to be extensive work on the engine. Just when it looked like everything was settled, Borzacchini at the wheel of the second Alfa felt a thump. He'd hit a pheasant at 150 miles an hour. Assuming he'd damaged the radiator, he pulled in at the pits, but after a quick check it turned out the car was made of sterner stuff, and he went back out to do the last lap of the race. Albert Divot had gone past in the Bugatti, but only to unlap himself. So the race was won by the Campari and Nuvolari pairing, with Borzacchini and Minoia second, followed by the Bugatti of Divot and Buria. The remaining 6 finishers were Wimy and Gopia in their private Bugatti, Ivanovski and Stoffel in the Mercedes, Ruggeri and Balestro in a 1920s-era Talbot 700 entered by the Scuderia Materassi, Pirola and Lurani in a private Alfa, Klinger and Gerzi in the Maserati, and Seneschal and Fiete in an elderly Delage. As the Alfa Romeo team, having finally broken Bugatti's winning streak, named their winning 8C model the Monza and telegraphed Mussolini back, "We have obeyed," Attention turned briefly stateside where the 19th Indy 500 went off as usual without any entries from Europe, in this case won by Indianapolis local Louis Schneider, who remains just one of 2 local boys to win the 500 alongside Bill Cummings in 1934. Don't forget to tune in next week for the thrilling conclusion to the 1931 season while I'm enjoying myself in sunny Stockholm. I'm actually recording this 3 weeks beforehand, so I expect it will actually be raining. Sideways. I'll say this again after part 2, but I also want to say a huge thank you to Leif Snellman and Hans Etzrott, who've put together an amazing site, goldenera.fi, which covers the pre-World War II years of Grand Prix racing, beginning all the way back with the Gordon Bennett Cup of 1900, and pulling from a huge variety of contemporary and modern sources. If you want to know more about this era of Grand Prix racing, you need to go and take a look.